In Southern Louisiana, a vicious killer is on the loose, slaughtering his victims in their own homes. The body count rises. Authorities struggle in their search for evidence. They resort to behavioral analysis, hoping to recognize a pattern that will help them identify a sadistic murderer.
In Louisiana, a brutal killer turned a rural area into his personal hunting ground. He preyed on the defenseless, the weak, and the elderly. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The killer would lie in wait, often striking while his victims slept. No one was safe, even in their own homes. Working with police, FBI profilers helped to identify a madman, to catch him before he could strike again.
LaPlace, Louisiana, May 9th, 1997. At 9:46 a.m., James Lowell, Jr., a deputy with the St. John's Parish Sheriff's Department, stops by his parents' home. Lowell's sister had called him at work, concerned why their parents aren't answering their phone. The deputy discovers the front door is ajar.
Mom? Mom?
He finds his father, James Lowell Sr., on the floor.
Dad? Mom?
His face is covered with blood.
Dad? Mom?
He checks his father's pulse
Dad?
and finds none.
Mom? Mom?
He looks for his mother. He finds her in the kitchen, brutally assaulted.
Mom?
Anne-Marie Lowell is unconscious and her pulse is faint, but she's alive.
Dispatch is low. Dispatch is low.
The deputy calls for an ambulance and backup.
My dad's dead. My mom's scared. We both. Send back her, please. Mom. Oh, Mom.
Within minutes, officers, detectives, and EMTs respond to the scene. The brutal attack shocks Detective Todd Himmel of the St. John Sheriff's Department.
This is a well-respected family in the community, well-known, good people. Most of our homicides are either drug-related or maybe an argument that escalated. To have a home invasion homicide is uncommon for this area. When I first made entry into the house, my first reaction was very gruesome. A tremendous amount of blood on the floor and the walls. The injuries to the victims were quite gruesome.
EMTs work to stabilize Mrs. Lowell for the short trip to River Parish Hospital. Later that day, she dies from her injuries. Deputy Lowell tells investigators how he found his parents. He points out a pair of eyeglasses on the kitchen floor that belonged to his father. Investigators find a blood-stained hammer near Mr. Lowell's body. The nature of the wounds to the victim's head and face lead investigators to believe this is the weapon that killed him. The detectives search the house.
When I made entry into the den area and observed the female's glasses laying on the floor with some blood, it was obvious that she was struck in that area.
Investigators find a large sugarcane knife, sometimes called a side blade or sling blade.
It's covered in blood, It was obvious that it was a weapon that inflicted the injuries on the female victim.
Detectives noticed that several volumes of an encyclopedia have been thrown to the floor.
Well, that's what he said. I'm finished over there. Okay. Ooh, did you see that?
We got money. That's a $100 bill out there.
Checking the books still on the shelf, they find the Lowells had hidden nearly $12,000 there.
Let's just pile them up here.
Family members later confirmed the total. The intruder did not find any of the money. Investigators theorized the killer's search was interrupted.
He was very close to finding the money. Apparently he was scared before he was able to. The son coming home to check on his parents may have scared him off.
Crime scene technicians dust nearly every exposed surface in the house, but the only fingerprints they find match the victims or close family members.
Hey, Tony, come here. Need you to get a couple of pictures of this.
Investigators search the exterior of the house. They discover the phone line, as well as the wires to the alarm, have been cut. And one of the garage windows has been removed.
We were able to determine point of entry, which is the side window. Apparently the suspect had enough time to actually take a knife and remove the putty from a pane of glass from the old wooden windows.
Detective Himmel suspects the killer took his time breaking into the Lowells' home.
The particular location that he had made entry into was camouflaged by a fence and some trees, so in essence, no one would have seen him if they were passing on the road, so he did have time to make entry and to actually whittle away the putty from that window pane before he made entry into the residence.
Investigators spread out to interview the Lowells' neighbors. Although LaPlace is a tight-knit community, nobody has noticed anything unusual. Detectives run background checks on everyone who has recently come in contact with the family. They discover that a handyman hired by the Lowells is an ex-convict. He spent 5 years in prison for manslaughter.
We began an investigation looking into his background. From that point, we kept him under constant surveillance.
3 days later, police bring the handyman in for questioning. He claims he is innocent, but a polygraph exam suggests he is being deceptive.
Anything?
Detectives obtain a warrant to search the suspect's home for clues. Crime technicians use luminol and black lights to hunt for blood evidence. Investigators theorize that the ex-con could have murdered the Lowells and quickly returned to his home. Once there, he inevitably would have deposited small amounts of blood. But their efforts turn up no evidence. Although detectives are unable to connect the suspect to the murders, they continue to keep him under surveillance. 5 days later, Detective Himmel arrives at the scene of a second brutal homicide. Another prominent member of the community has been murdered. Officers responding to a missing persons call discovered the body of 58-year-old Joyce Gilmer in the backyard of her home. According to her family, her car is missing. The victim has 4 bloody lacerations to the back of the head. Detective Himmel immediately suspects that this murder is related to the double homicide.
There were several similarities between the two. Namely, both victims were well known throughout the community, elderly. They either owned or had owned their own business at one point. The weapon of choice was a sharp-edged object.
Investigators now realize they can rule out the possibility that the ex-con is the killer.
He was under constant surveillance at the time that this crime had occurred, so we could eliminate him as being a suspect because we felt strongly that both crimes were related.
Detective Himmel walks through the house looking for signs of an intruder. He finds none until he gets to the master bedroom. It appears as if the killer knew exactly what he wanted, the victim's family reported a safe is missing.
The only room that was disturbed was the master bedroom closet where the safe was located, which indicated to us that the perpetrator knew exactly where to go and knew exactly what he was looking for when he went into the residence. And having knowledge of that, the safe existed inside that master bedroom, it's a good possibility he knew the victim, that it could be one reason that he did murder her, is because she knew who he was and could identify him.
The investigators find no evidence of blood inside the house. They conclude that the victim was likely forced into the backyard, where she was murdered. Crime scene investigators process the house for evidence, including hair, fiber, and fingerprints. The killer has been careful. Once again, he has left nothing behind. Later that day, investigators find Mrs. Gilmer's car in the parking lot of a hotel just a few miles from her home. Deputies tow the vehicle to the sheriff's impound lot for analysis.
When the car was found, the keys were still in it, so it was obvious that he had used that area just to dump the vehicle and had gotten into another vehicle, which was either parked there previously or he was picked up by someone.
Crime technicians collect several fingerprints, but they only match the victim and members of the victim's family. For Detective Himmel, the car is another dead end.
We didn't have any physical evidence that could determine who the perpetrator was or even assist us in determining who the perpetrator was.
Investigators review videotapes taken by the hotel's security cameras. Unfortunately, the cameras were not focused on the area where the stolen vehicle was abandoned.
It was a very stressful, very tense moment, trying to determine who's responsible for these crimes, working 20 hours a day, getting 4 hours of sleep a night. It was quite stressful.
With limited resources and almost no evidence to go on, the St. John Sheriff's Department calls the New Orleans field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Detectives hope FBI profilers can help identify a vicious killer. Special Agent Dan Funk travels to the scenes of both homicides, starting with the Lowell murders. Investigators are still processing the home 2 weeks after the slayings.
Part of my job, being at the field, at the scene, is to provide all the information that the profiling unit at Quantico needs to do their work. They're not at the scene. I'm the local eyes and ears for that unit. What I do is go to the crime scene, try to absorb as much information as I can, and then provide it back to Quantico.
Agent Funk tries to determine step by step what happened the day of the murder.
I'm looking for pre-offense behavior, offense behavior, and post-offense behavior, which basically means what the subject and the victims did prior to the crime, during the crime, and then after the crime.
Small clues help the agent establish a timeline.
It appeared that the subject spent maybe the whole night in the garage waiting for the victims to wake up. We noticed that because the newspaper was picked up in the morning, and it was the victim's routine to immediately pick up the paper upon rising. And then it looked like there was coffee grounds in the garbage to indicate that they made coffee and were settling down for their morning routine before the attack occurred.
There's one that belongs in the garage.
According to the family, the murder weapon, a cane knife or sling blade, was kept in the garage with other tools. The killer had literally hacked Mrs. Lowell to death with a 40-inch blade that he found in her own garage.
You could see blood on the floor, blood splattered on the walls. You proceeded through the house, and wherever you looked, there was blood. You could just see marks on the walls and on door jambs where you could picture that the subject just swinging this wildly at the victim.
What are you doing? Leave me alone! Leave me alone,
This was probably the worst crime scene that I've ever seen. And it spread throughout the house, which indicated that There was just an ongoing confrontation between the victims and the subject that just went on and on.
With the discovery of Mrs. Lowell's eyeglasses in the den, investigators believe that was where the killer first encountered his victim. Since her body was located in the kitchen, investigators speculate she was chased there by the intruder. The discovery of Mr. Lowell's eyeglasses on the kitchen floor suggests a possible scenario.
To have Mr. Lowell's glasses in the kitchen, we believe that's the initial point of contact between him and the perpetrator.
Investigators theorize that Mr. Lowell entered the kitchen attempting to defend his wife, but they note his body was found in the hallway.
We believe he was either trying to get another weapon or trying to get to a phone that was in the hallway.
After viewing both the Lowell and Gilmer crime scenes, Agent Funk is confident he has enough information to take to Quantico.
We definitely believe that this was a case that the profiling unit could assist on. There was a lot of interaction between the victim and the subject, and there were a lot of activity that could be used to come up with an offender profile.
But could FBI profilers help identify the killer before he strikes again? In Louisiana, a killer has murdered 3 prominent citizens in a small town. He strikes with extreme violence, but leaves few clues.
Away from our victims.
At FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia, Special Agent Dan Funk and local investigators brief FBI profilers on the murders.
My partner, he's got the newest case that we're working.
The expert observes that the Lowell crime scene reflects a mixed behavior.
So it's a good two-handed weapon, very sharp. It's not worth anything.
The subject was organized in the burglaries, but disorganized in the murders. The subject brought tools with him to disable alarms and phone lines and to enter the residence, but he was disorganized once he entered it. He didn't bring a weapon with him, but he found weapons of opportunity located at the scene.
Profilers also note that careful planning gave way to extreme violence when the intruder confronted his victims. The brutality of the murders suggests a chaotic personality.
We've got some good stuff here, some good solid police.
But the profiler tells St. John's investigators that he will not be able to create a profile powerful enough based on only 2 incidents.
Solid profile.
They need more data.
We can't just sit around and wait for.
What I am going to suggest is
The profiler's advice to the investigators is to go back and search through their cold case files to look for similar unsolved murders in nearby jurisdictions.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Investigators from St. John's Sheriff's Department meet with detectives from nearby parishes. The detectives share the details of their cold case files and make a chilling discovery. They find that over the last year, 3 unsolved homicides bear striking similarities to the Lowell and Gilmer murders. Records show that 8 months earlier, in nearby Ascension Parish, the owner of an auto repair shop was beaten to death with an aluminum baseball bat. A substantial amount of money was stolen from the victim's home.
He's in his late 50s. He owns an auto repair shop in my district. It happened about a year before your double murder.
5 months later, in St. James Parish, a 58-year-old woman was stabbed and beaten to death in her home. Police found a bloody knife in the sink. They were unable to recover any fingerprints from the weapon or at the scene.
Photos. They had a 58-year-old woman.
Less than 3 weeks later, also in Ascension Parish, a 71-year-old woman was beaten and stabbed to death in her bedroom. The victim was stabbed multiple times and bludgeoned with a trophy. Detectives found an open safe in a bedroom closet. The contents, value unknown, had been removed.
What was strange was she was found under an overturned couch.
Phone lines and alarm wires to the residence had been cut. Investigators conclude that as many as 6 homicides may have been committed by the same killer. But before the task force can ask the FBI to review the new data and create a more detailed profile, there is another attack. Shortly after 4 o'clock in the morning, on July 7th, 1997, detectives from the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department arrive at the home of Vincent and Julie Rowland. A uniformed officer briefs Sergeant Detective Mike Toney.
The sheriff's office responded to the 911 call that we received. After the sheriff's office patrol division arrived at the residence, they learned that there was a home invasion. It was a brutal attack. It was a vicious attack upon two elderly people of the community.
Detective Toney learns the couple sustained severe lacerations and gunshot wounds. Miraculously, they are both alive. The next day, Toney visits the hospital and learns that both victims have been stabilized. The doctor tells investigators that dozens of .410 gauge shotgun pellets were removed from the face, neck, and chest areas of both victims. If the Rowlands had been struck by larger gauge ammunition, they might not have survived. Among his injuries, Mr. Rowland has a large knife wound and shotgun blast to his face.
It was remarkable that he was able to talk and give us information. He was determined to give this information because he wanted his attacker caught. And he gave a wealth of information as to how the attack took place.
The man tells investigators he and his wife were in bed, asleep.
It was around 2 or so in the morning. He was awakened when this large 30-pound rock was thrown upon his face. As he rises up out of the bed, the attacker starts hitting him in the facial area with the side blade. He tries to defend himself from the attack.
The man struck him with the sling blade over and over again. Mr. Rowland said he was ordered to open a safe that was in the bedroom closet. He told the man he couldn't open the safe because he was hurt too badly. He and his wife were forced into the bathroom.
The combination of the safe.
To buy time, he intentionally gave his attacker the wrong combination.
36, 4, 34. Wrong answer. That's not the combination.
He ordered Mrs. Rowland to open the safe or he would kill them both.
Go! 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 Open the safe. Let's go, you're taking forever. Open it up! Back up.
The safe contained over $100,000 in cash. After cleaning out the safe,
Stay there. I'll kill you.
the intruder moved to the opposite side of the house.
No, it's all right. Stay here.
Mr. Rowland could see him through the bathroom window.
All right. Stay there. No, stay here. I'll take care of this.
He left the bathroom and went for the chest in the bedroom closet where he kept 2 guns. He hid behind the sofa and waited. He had taken the wrong revolver.
No.
The one he kept loaded was still in the closet. The intruder had found a shotgun in a gun cabinet.
No.
Mr. Rowland was hit in the face.
He laid there pretending to be dead, at which time he heard someone walk up to him, which he didn't realize it was his wife. He hears a second shot goes off, and then he realizes his wife has just been shot.
Mrs. Rowland tells investigators that she laid still until the intruder left. She then tried to call 911, but the phone line had been cut. Terrified and bleeding, she managed to drive to her son's house, where he called the police. Ascension Parish detectives share details of the Rowland statements with investigators. They are confident the attack is connected to the homicides they are investigating.
They were linked due to the type of home invasion it was. The perpetrator entered the residence through a window. Prior to opening the window, he had cut the phone wires to the residence, which would disable the alarm system. And then after entering the residence, seeking a weapon of opportunity, and then attacking the victims while they were in the house.
The detectives also note similarities in the killer's victims.
They were all elderly and owned businesses, and they were wealthy.
The Rowlands are the only people who have come face to face with this brutal killer and lived to tell about it. Investigators return to the hospital with a sketch artist who creates a composite drawing of the suspect based on the Rowlands' eyewitness description.
They described him as a white male with kind of shaggy-looking hair, thin, very authoritative voice. They described his voice as being of a person from the River Parish, from this area, as far as having a strong South Louisiana accent.
Investigators released the composite drawing of the assailant to the local news media. The wanted man is described as being a white male in his 20s or 30s, of average height with medium build and sandy blonde hair. Now, law enforcement from 3 Louisiana jurisdictions finally have their first lead in identifying a ruthless killer. An elderly Louisiana couple narrowly survives a brutal assault on their lives. Their attacker has been linked to 6 murders in 10 months. Now the suspected serial killer is on the loose with over $100,000 in cash. Armed with the survivors' statements, Louisiana investigators returned to Quantico, Virginia to present the newly linked cases to the FBI's profiling unit. The profilers agreed that the 6 homicides in the latest attack are most likely all connected. They suspect the killer lives or works in the area. He is nocturnal, and he may have recently purchased items he normally could not afford. The investigators now have a rough sketch of their suspect, but they need to move fast if they are to catch him. FBI Special Agent Dan Funk.
Now you had 2 live witnesses, subjects under pressure to believe that there's people out there who can identify him. So we believe that either he would change his appearance, or he might even leave the area.
You've got several good...
The profilers recommend forming an official task force and asking the public to look out for anyone exhibiting any of the characteristics identified by the unit.
That's what we're going to recommend. We can do that.
The public appeal prompts thousands of phone calls to the task force hotline. A security guard from a local video poker casino provides an intriguing lead. He tells a detective that one of the regular customers at the casino looks a lot like the composite drawing he saw on TV. Detective Mike Toney of the Ascension Sheriff's Department.
He described the individual as a person who, before these attacks, would come in there and spend very little money. Poor dresser. Since the attacks, he would come in, he would spend a lot of money. He would then started sporting jewelry, riding a new motorcycle, basically changed his appearance.
But the security guard does not know the customer's name.
He gave a description of the person, what he looked like, as well as a vehicle that he was driven. And this vehicle was very unique. It was actually a truck, a large truck with a large boom on the back of it that was used to like lift motors and stuff and carry them around.
The detective reviews the security guard's recorded statement with the rest of the task force. His description of the customer's behavior is consistent with the profiler's analysis. Hearing the security guard's remarks about the customer's truck, a detective realizes he knows the man being described.
A pickup truck, it had a homemade hoist on the back of it.
The customer is an auto mechanic who once worked for a friend of his, the same man who had been beaten to death with a baseball bat in his home 6 months earlier. A murder linked to their suspect.
Yeah, there's a handful of them.
The mechanic's name is Daniel Blank. Blank is a former employee of an auto repair shop owned by the victim. He was one of 36 people police interviewed in connection with that crime. Although he had voluntarily given a statement to the police, detectives found nothing suspicious. A check of his record reveals one prior arrest for a minor theft in St. James Parish.
That's one side. Anybody want to go out and talk to him?
Investigators travel to Daniel Blank's last known residence to ask him some questions. A woman answers the door. She says she is the mother of Sonia Radford, Daniel Blank's girlfriend.
She advised us that Daniel Blank and his girlfriend had just moved to Texas, that he wasn't there. Left my information with her. If she would speak to him after we leave, would she give the information to him that we needed to talk to him?
Very important that he gets up with us. Okay, we greatly appreciate that. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
10 minutes after Detective Tony returns to his office, he receives a telephone call.
Detective Tony.
It is Daniel Blank.
Hey, listen, can I put you on hold just a second?
He says he is calling from Onalaska, Texas.
And while I'm on the phone with him, I advised him that we were investigating several homicides of elderly people. And from those homicides, a large amount of money was stolen from these people. And he just started being a wealth of information. He started talking about how he was gambling, that he was winning a lot of money, that he had all the receipts for his gambling winnings. And during the conversation, he tells me that he will be back in Louisiana within a few days. So it was set up where he would come and meet with us when he came back into Louisiana.
Okay, Daniel. Well, please call me as soon as you get back here, okay?
All right. Thank you. All right.
But Daniel Blank has no intention of returning to Louisiana. So investigators will have to go and find him. In Louisiana, authorities identify a suspect in a series of brutal murders. But as the investigation heats up, the suspect moves to a small town in the neighboring state of Texas. Federal agents in Louisiana contact Special Agent Rick Locke at the FBI's Lufkin, Texas resident agency. Agent Locke often works undercover, so his identity must be protected.
Anytime that there's a case that would involve the violent death of a number of people and the possibility of a serial killer on the loose, that would be moved to a #1 priority.
Agent Locke asks Lieutenant Detective Mike Nettles from the Polk County Sheriff's Department to locate and surveil Daniel Blank. Nettles searches local utility records and finds Blank living with his girlfriend, Sonia Radford, in a trailer park in Onalaska.
Once we identified him, then we started working on trying to build a case to see, was he spending a lot of money? Did he have a lot of money? Because we knew that there was a lot of money taken from some of the murder scenes in South Louisiana.
Good look at him.
Special Agent Locke and Detective Nettles keep the suspect under a close watch.
When we were conducting the surveillance of Blank, we did notice that he had purchased a vehicle since he had arrived in Texas. He had purchased a trailer home. He then leased a automobile repair shop business and opened a business known as Daniel's Automotive.
Public records reveal that Blank has leased the garage in his girlfriend's name. After surveilling Blank for nearly 2 weeks, Agent Locke and Deputy Nettles meet with the Louisiana Task Force and a Texas U.S. attorney. The investigators brief the prosecutor on the results of a financial background check on Daniel Blank.
He was spending a large amount of money, which fit the behavioral profile. After doing a financial background on him, we learned that in this year where he was spending all this money, he had no means of income that was showing up on his state employment records.
Tony, please.
During an earlier phone conversation with Blank, Detective Tony broached the subject of his income.
And that's when he started going into his gambling habits. All the money that I got, I won from gambling. So we had a person who was spending literally thousands of dollars at local gambling casinos. And then after doing the background and financial records through the casinos, we learned that he was actually spending more money than he was winning. So he was actually in a negative for his gambling records.
In addition to his massive gambling losses, Blank has purchased an SUV, a car, a new motorcycle, 2 trailer lots for $22,000, a $14,000 trailer, and a $4,000 above-ground swimming pool. Records reveal that most of the purchases were made with cash. The prosecutor agrees that the circumstantial evidence is impressive, but investigators have not produced any evidence that places Blank at any of the crime scenes or that connects him to a weapon. If investigators hope to make their case against Blank, they need hard, physical evidence. In Louisiana, technicians have recovered many latent fingerprints from the crime scenes. Analysts have matched most of the prints to the victims and their family members. Technicians compare the remaining unknown prints to a set of Daniel Blank's fingerprints, obtained during an arrest for an earlier minor violation. They determined that the prints do not match, but Blank's old record is incomplete. There are no palm prints in his file. And investigators have several palm prints from the crime scenes listed as unknown. The investigators devise a plan to obtain a set of palm prints from Daniel Blank. Through a records check, Detective Nettles and Agent Locke have learned that Blank does not have a valid driver's license. After weeks of surveillance, they have observed that Blank has a habit of running a particular stop sign near his business. The plan is for Nettles to perform a traffic stop the next time he does.
Driver's license registration?
I don't have my license on me.
As predicted, Blank is unable to produce a valid driver's
My
license.
license expired.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and have to go down to the courthouse.
Is all this really necessary, you think?
You walk around the side of the car.
Yeah.
Nettles places him under arrest and takes him to the Polk County Sheriff's Office. During the booking process, officers take a full set of finger and palm prints from Blank. If the palm prints match the prints at any of the Louisiana crime scenes, investigators will have the evidence they need to obtain an indictment. Blank pays a $50 fine and is released. At the fingerprint lab, technicians compare the palm prints to latent prints collected at the crime scenes. In case after case, the results are negative. They do not match. All the prints collected at the crime scenes either belong to family members, victims, or remain unknown. So for now, suspected serial killer Daniel Blank will remain free. In Louisiana, 6 people are dead, the victims of a vicious killer. An intense investigation has revealed a prime suspect, but no hard evidence to tie him to the crimes. The suspect is volatile. Investigators have to get him off the streets. Now the only person who can provide the evidence they need is the suspect himself, FBI Special Agent Rick Locke.
It was decided that we must continue the case by planning for a detailed interview with Blank, as well as conducting a search of his properties. We were looking for any evidence which would definitely link him to the crimes in Louisiana.
Investigators served Daniel Blank with warrants to search his business and home. Detective Nettles asks Blank if he will come to the courthouse for a voluntary interview. He agrees. Blank is not arrested, but he is advised of his Miranda rights.
Do you mind if I record this conversation?
And put it on video?
No, I
Have any problems with that?
No, go ahead.
Louisiana detectives Mike Toney and Todd Himmel conduct the critical
Tell me a
interview.
little bit about yourself.
It's a lot of pressure. You know that you either get a confession and solve these cases or you don't, and you have nothing.
Sure. Where are you from?
We had no physical evidence, and the circumstantial evidence wasn't that great to bring him to trial. We knew we needed a confession. We knew we needed him to tell us that he was responsible for killing these people. Without that, we had nothing. Our strategy was to first begin with background information with Daniel, asking questions that we knew the answer to. His family life, his education, his work background, that probably consumed an hour and a half. We then moved on to covering some of the homicides. The interview started to get interesting, I'd say probably within the third hour. At that point, we had challenged him on some of these homicides. We had asked him if he thought it odd that 2 of his former employers were deceased.
But I damn sure didn't kill him. I didn't kill him.
At that point, he became a little agitated. We were walking a fine line. We didn't want to upset him where he would walk out. He was not under arrest. He could have left at any moment.
But it wasn't me. I don't have nothing.
Blank continues to deny any involvement in the murders. It appears unlikely that he will confess to anything. Down the hall, investigators question Blank's girlfriend, Sonia Radford. She has also agreed to a voluntary interview.
Investigating several homicides.
It was entirely a consensual interview. She was free to leave. The interviewers approached her and asked if she would willingly visit with them in an interview room at the courthouse, and that was done. She did agree.
Sonia tells investigators she stayed out of Daniel's affairs, but she does admit he would often go out at night without telling her where he was going. Sonia also admits that a couple of times she dropped him off around the areas where the murders had been committed. Blank always told her he was going to repair someone's car. Sonia tells investigators she never wanted to believe Daniel was involved. A few doors down, Blank continues to deny any responsibility for the crimes.
I need you to go on record. I'd like you to take a polygraph, if that's okay with you.
He even agrees to take a polygraph exam.
Just answer yes or no.
I believe he agreed to take the polygraph because he needed to give the appearance that he was cooperative and that he wanted us to believe he was innocent.
The examiner asks Blank if he ever struck Mrs. Gilmer, the elderly woman found outside her home. Blank answers
No.
After 3 tests, The polygraph examiner reports that Blank is exhibiting deceptive behaviors. He is most likely not telling the truth. Blank is beginning to show signs of stress. His interrogators decide to further destabilize him by introducing an emotional subject, the recent death of his mother.
My father was no help.
I could tell that his relationship was close with his mother. From that point, I just discussed his upbringing. He came from a large family.
I helped her as much as I could.
I knew it wasn't easy for him because of the size of the family and both parents trying to provide food and support and housing for their children.
Daniel, did you love your mother?
Yeah.
If she were alive today and you were involved in these murders, do you think she'd want you to do the right thing?
Yeah.
Did you mean to kill Mrs. Gilmore?
No.
That was very important. That was the first admission that he had made that he was responsible for committing that crime.
Once Blank begins to confess, he doesn't stop. He ultimately admits to 6 homicides and 2 attempted murders. He tells Detective Himmel about his first murder, which occurred 8 months before the St. John's double homicide. Blank tells investigators he worked for the victim and claimed the man owed him money for a job he had done. He says he entered his boss's home and found him asleep on the couch. He tried to take his wallet, but the man woke up. Blank claims the man attacked him with a baseball bat. When he slipped and fell, Blank got a hold of the bat and started hitting back. He didn't stop beating the man until he was dead. Blank said he took $800 or $900 from the man's pockets.
I lost.
He knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew the difference between right and wrong. And I believe after that first homicide, it just became easier and easier every time it occurred again.
In his confession, Blank consistently claims he acted in self-defense.
I shot them.
He insists that all 6 murder victims attacked him first.
So he was trying to kill you?
They were trying to kill me.
I appreciate you being honest.
Blank's interpretation may be self-serving, but his memory of the crime scenes is nearly photographic.
The recollection was amazing. The amount of detail he was able to remember, being able to draw diagrams of the homes, draw diagrams of weapons that he used. His attention to detail was amazing.
The confession continues for 13 hours.
By the time he got to the end, he was very comfortable, drinking his soft drink, smoking a cigarette, very comfortable, nonchalantly discussing these crimes in detail.
Authorities in Texas arrest Daniel Blank on murder charges and then extradite him to Louisiana to face trial. Daniel Blank is convicted of 5 homicides and receives 3 life terms and 2 death sentences. He is currently on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. The state of Louisiana decides not to pursue charges for the 6th homicide and attempted murders, confident that Daniel Blank will never leave this place alive.
In Boston, a police call becomes deadly. The gunman escapes. But Boston police and the FBI vow to find him. Uncovering his past, they navigate a trail of criminal connections, false names, and hidden danger to make him pay for his brutal attack on the law.
A criminal who kills a police officer wages war on society. In 1987, such a criminal vanished after shooting 2 Boston officers, one fatally. He had a history of violence against cops and the protection of a group of outlaws as he fled across state and national borders. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Finding this elusive cop killer meant breaking his co-conspirators before he slipped away forever.
Boston, Massachusetts. The city's Back Bay district is an upscale area, unaccustomed to violent crime. At 12:30 a.m. on October 2nd, 1987, in one Back Bay apartment building, Meredith Falcone and her cousin were locked in an argument. He had threatened her and she was trying to get him to leave. She feared he wouldn't go away, but instead grow angrier. She called 911.
911, this call is recorded. What is your emergency?
The emergency operator dispatched 2 police vehicles to the scene. Within minutes, the first squad car arrived at the apartment building. It seemed a fairly routine call for officers George Torres and Chris Rogers. They rang Meredith Falcone on the intercom. But there was a problem with her front door release buzzer, according to Officer Torres.
She came over the speaker, the intercom, and stated to us that her buzzer doesn't work, to ring somebody else's to let us in. In the background, while she was talking, we could hear some commotion, so we knew that there was something going on inside the apartment.
Then 2 more officers, William Kennedy and Roy Sergey, arrived on the scene. So far, none of the tenants had responded to buzz them in. So the officers decided to split up.
We took the standard procedure that 2 of us would cover the back and 2 would stay in front. At that point, Officer Rogers and myself proceeded to the back.
Torres and Rogers searched for another way into the building.
We look into a little alcove behind the building, and we see a male up against the side of the wall, sort of trying to hide.
Perhaps it was the cousin the caller had mentioned.
I asked him to come towards me to find out what's going on.
The fence's gate was padlocked.
Over the fence. I told him to climb over the fence towards my side. As he put his feet on the ground, he attempted to flee. At that point, I grabbed him and I started the pat-down procedure. Once I put my hands on his shoulders, he shoved me. Gut instinct told me that he had a gun.
Torres was hit. The man kept firing at Officer Rogers, then chased Torres. Rogers couldn't get a clean shot. By then, Kennedy and Sergey had come to the side. Officer Sergey had been shot too.
Shots fired, 13-12 combat.
Though injured, Torres tried to assist Roy Sergey. Kennedy chased the suspect for several blocks, but he had disappeared into the Boston night.
As I knelt over him and leaned over, I noticed that there was blood coming out of my left arm and the left side of my chest. And at that point, I knew that I was hit several times.
Rogers called for backup and emergency personnel.
I felt the pain, the burning sensation. I started to gasp for air a little. At that point, I knew that something had gone through my lung.
Boston Dispatch put out the call that all police dread hearing. Officers down. Every available unit responded. In a matter of minutes, the normally quiet Back Bay district was swarming with emergency vehicles. Both critically wounded, officers Roy Sergey and George Torres were rushed to the hospital. Detectives interviewed officers Rogers and Kennedy. They explained what happened and said the assailant was an Asian male about 30 years old, of average height and with a muscular build. The description of the gunman differed from that of Meredith Falcone's cousin, the man who had started the domestic disturbance in the building. Officer Kennedy, a trained sniper, felt certain he shot the gunman as he fled, but no blood was found in that area. The injured officers had sustained 3 bullet wounds each, including life-threatening chest wounds. They were losing blood fast. Medical personnel struggled to stabilize them for emergency surgery. At the crime scene, forensic technicians began processing the area where the gunfight took place. It was littered with shell casings, bullet fragments, and blood. Detailing the placement of each item would help reconstruct exactly who fired when. Blocks away, they recovered an ammunition clip from a handgun, believed to be dropped by the gunman. It was a 15-round clip from a 9mm Sig Sauer semi-automatic, and it was empty. If it was the gunman's, they hoped to find fingerprints or some other forensic evidence that might lead them to him. In the lab, they would lift one partial print, but it was not enough for any comparison. Police issued a citywide alert for the suspect. They searched all of the Back Bay district and beyond. But that night, they found no sign of the gunman. Sergeant Detective James Fong of Boston's D14 station was named lead detective.
When I first heard that Roy Sergey and Joe Torres were shot, I was actually really surprised and shocked that someone would shoot Boston police officers.
Though worried about his colleagues, Detective Fong still had to do his job.
The crime scene is still a crime scene regardless of whether a police officer or a civilian involved, and you have to take everything step by step.
He first wanted to determine where the assailant had come from. Then he might be able to identify him.
I had already been given information that the individual who was involved in the shooting had come out from the back gate. We then, myself and other officers, went and investigated that area.
Inside the gated fence, they noticed a large air conditioning unit. On closer inspection, Detective Fong discovered shoe prints on the cover of the unit.
The footprints that we recovered at the scene were something consistent with where the officers, George Torres and Christopher Rogers, said that they had seen the individual.
Directly above the air conditioner was a window from a third-floor hallway.
I believe the footprints got on the cover by an individual jumping from the third-floor window onto the air-conditioned cover.
This suggested that the suspect was likely connected to the building somehow. Detectives wanted to interview the roughly 60 residents of the building. Fong decided to start with those of Asian descent.
The assailant was an Asian male, and I tried to put two to two together, thinking that maybe he did come from that building and maybe he was related or did reside at that building.
A forensic artist had created a composite sketch of the suspect based on the officer's descriptions. But the residents didn't recognize the man. Although they had heard the commotion and gunshots the night before, they could offer little help.
I interviewed all of the Asian occupants that were known to have resided in that building at that time of this incident, and none of them were able to give me any good solid leads.
Other residents couldn't help either.
I spoke to most of the tenants, and they didn't even know the next door neighbor because of the fact that it's a short-term lease type apartment. They were only there for a few days, a few weeks.
It seemed a dead end. At the hospital, the wounded officers were in critical but stable condition. Investigators were frustrated they had no leads on the man who shot them. Then, 6 days after the shooting, detectives returned to the apartment building to check out a new lead.
We had received a call from the manager who stated to us that there was an Asian male that had lived there and that she forgot to tell us about, and that they had gone in to check on his well-being because they hadn't seen him for that week.
The manager believed the place had been abandoned.
Boston Police, search warrant.
The tenant's name was Mark Tera. He loosely fit the description of the gunman.
All clear?
Earl, can you come on inside here?
A building employee pointed out a box of ammunition they discovered when they had come in to check on Tera.
Can you take a picture of that and bag it?
Technicians collected the bullets, noting they were 9mm, the same caliber as the casings and fragments found at the crime scene. In the lab, the bullets would be compared against those used in the shooting. Detective Fong checked the space where a ceiling tile was moved to the side. It was clear, but something might have been hidden there before. The apartment was spare and neat, suggesting the tenant might have served time in the military or prison. The technicians scoured the entire apartment for additional evidence.
We recovered a number of items: clothing, personal effects, and ammunition, and fingerprints and hair samples.
But nothing indicated where Tera had gone. Checking the name, they learned Mark Tera had no police record. But Detective Fong got a copy of his rental contract. On it, Tera listed a previous address and phone number in San Francisco. Detective Fong called the number and spoke with a man named Leon Perry.
Hi, this is Detective Fong with the Boston Police Department.
Perry was reluctant to talk, and he denied knowing Tera.
The individual that I spoke to was very evasive. In fact, I identified myself as a police officer with the city of Boston who was investigating a shooting of 2 police officers. The individual then became very defensive, stating to me that he did not want to help the police department.
Perry seemed suspicious, but police had nothing that connected him to the shooting. Fong had San Francisco police run a check on Perry, and they reported he had no local record there. Boston police received a copy of Mark Tera's California driver's license photo.
George, I'm going to show you some photos here.
They brought it to the one officer who got the best look at the shooter, George Torres.
This picture just jumped out right at me. And I stated to him, that's the guy that shot us. Anxiety and fear ran through my body. Anxiety knowing that we have an ID on the suspect, and fear because He's still out on the street.
With a suspect identified, the Boston police held a press conference 1 week after the shootout.
Based on the information available to me and to our investigators, which I cannot disclose, we have an unusually violent person, and quite frankly, it's scary.
They believed they knew who the gunman was. Now, they had to find him. In Boston, a shootout left 2 police officers critically wounded. Suspect Mark Tera had disappeared. Investigators discovered his last known address was in San Francisco and asked their counterparts in the Bay Area to help.
That'll be about it. Everybody has their assignments?
They sent the San Francisco police wanted posters of Tera and asked them to have their officers look out for him in case he returned there. After a morning roll call, Sergeant Greg Lynch checked the wanted poster clipboard.
On the clipboard was a flyer regarding a suspect who had shot 2 Boston police officers. I knew I had seen the individual, I just couldn't immediately place where I had seen him.
Then Sergeant Lynch remembered an off-duty incident that had occurred 6 weeks earlier. In August of that year, as he was leaving a movie theater with a friend, he had spotted a man on the street carrying a handgun.
My first thought was he may have been a police officer, but when I looked at him, the feeling I got is he was not a police officer, especially when he turned and he looked at me intently. After the light turned green, he walked across the street. I told my friend to go to the phone, dial 911, tell him who I was, where I was, and that I had a man with a gun.
Lynch's instinct told him the man was a criminal. He followed the man, though he couldn't stop him from driving away. Sergeant Lynch did get the man's Texas license plate number.
Once I realized that the man in the Boston flyer was the man I saw at the movie house, that's when I started my investigation in acquiring the information that I called in back in August, including the license plate number, and that came back to a David Tera.
Though the suspect used the first name Mark in Boston, it was the same man. His record was clean, and his registration listed a post office box in Brownsville, Texas. Lynch forwarded the information to investigators in Boston. In turn, Boston police immediately contacted authorities in Brownsville and asked for their assistance. A detective from the Brownsville police checked the post office box and found the suspect's street address. He went to the apartment building where the suspect had lived.
I'd like to ask you a few questions about one of your tenants. Okay.
The detective showed the apartment manager a photo of the man known as Mark, or David Tera. The manager recognized the photo, but he didn't know him by either of those names. He knew him as Ted Atsuki. Atsuki had moved out months ago, and the manager had no idea where he had gone.
Sir, if you think of anything else that can help me, please give me a call. Thank you very much.
The Brownsville detective ran a check on the name Ted Atsuki and learned that was the suspect's true name. The names Mark and David Tera were aliases. Atsuki had an extensive criminal record, including a 1979 Texas bank heist preceded by the armed takeover of a small-town police station. In March of 1979, Atsuki overpowered the 2 officers manning the Los Fresnos police station, then took out their communications center. With the police neutralized, he walked across the street and robbed the local bank, of $70,000. Atsuki was eventually convicted of the robbery and served 7 years of a 15-year sentence in Leavenworth Prison. Within a year of his release, he was wanted again for violating parole by leaving the state of Texas.
Criminal investigations, please.
The Brownsville detective called Boston and offered to send Atsuki's fingerprints.
Brownsville, Texas. Got some information on a active case you got up there.
11 days had passed since the shooting of the officers in Boston, and the city was still on edge. By that time, police technicians there had lifted a single usable print from the suspect's rental contract. They compared it against Ted Atsuki's print sent from Texas. Checking comparison points, they made a match. Investigators were sure Atsuki was the gunman who had shot officers George Tera and Roy Sergey. They also believed he had left Massachusetts. Boston police contacted the FBI for assistance, and the case was assigned to Special Agent J. Fallon of the Boston Field Office.
With the probable cause that he had fled the state to avoid being arrested, the FBI obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant.
Agents tracked down a known associate of Atsuki in the area and convinced him to cooperate.
That's what we're looking for. Okay.
He said he heard the suspect had come to Boston as part of a bank robbery plot.
Certainly first thing tomorrow morning, okay, as soon as I talk to that guy.
It was our belief that Ted Atsuki was in the Boston area in order to put together a collection of associates to formulate a plan by which they would identify and kidnap a bank official.
It appeared the shooting of the officers was completely unrelated, a tragic mistake. Investigators believed that on the night of the shootings, Ted Atsuki was in his apartment. Boston police arrived at the building in response to the domestic disturbance call.
I can't buzz you in, my buzzer doesn't work.
They believed Atsuki mistakenly assumed the officers were there to arrest him for violating his parole in Texas.
Boston PD, please let us in.
He grabbed his 9mm Sig Sauer and extra rounds of ammunition. When police buzzed asking for entry, Atsuki was ready to go. Police believed he jumped from a hallway window to the air conditioning unit below. Seconds later, the gunfight. Ted Atsuki was willing to do anything to escape. In 1987, Boston police and the FBI searched for Ted Atsuki, wanted for the shooting of 2 police officers. Special Agent J. Fallon tried to narrow the search for the fugitive and predict his moves.
A very basic tenet in these type of investigations is to identify and interview the subject's friends and family and associates in an effort to determine any nuances insofar as what his likes, dislikes, where he might be.
They had contacted Leon Perry in San Francisco, whom they believed to be an associate, but he claimed not to know the fugitive. Surveilling Perry, they realized he was using Atsuki's car. They watched it, but never saw Atsuki. The FBI's database had revealed Leon Perry spent time in Leavenworth Prison with Atsuki. When confronted, Perry admitted knowing the suspect, but said he had not spoken to him in months and had no idea where he was. They didn't have probable cause for an arrest, but they impounded the car and arranged for spot surveillance of Perry. When they searched his apartment, they found no sign of Atsuki. In Boston, the case took a tragic turn. The 2 wounded officers had been recovering well. But on October 26, 1987, Roy Sergey died suddenly when a blood clot lodged in his heart, causing cardiac arrest.
Detail! Bring the sand!
Sergeant Detective James Fong.
When I first learned that Roy had passed away, I was in complete shock. I had seen him 2 nights before, and he and I were engaged in small talk conversation. I remember Roy saying to me, I'll be seeing you guys upstairs, that being in the detective's room, working alongside with us upon his recovery. I made it a personal commitment to myself that we would seek out the individual that shot and killed Roy Sergey.
Ted Atsuki grew up in Texas and had family there. Hoping to find him, investigators interviewed his relatives in the area. They were shocked by the allegations and said they had not seen or heard from Atsuki in several months. They claimed they had no idea where he was.
Thanks for coming by.
To confirm their story, investigators subpoenaed their phone records. They discovered several recent calls from the relative's home to Atsuki's former roommate Leon Perry in San Francisco. The records also revealed calls to a second ex-convict, a former bank robber in Minnesota. The FBI brought him in, and he agreed to turn informant. He gave more details about Atsuki's plan for hostage-taking, bank robbery, and murder. Atsuki had associates create remote-controlled briefcase bombs to be handcuffed to the wrists of kidnapped bank officials. After the officials removed cash from their own vaults, Atsuki and his men would detonate the bombs to eliminate witnesses.
Many times people come up with ideas which others might think of as being harebrained, but Ted Atsuki took the time to actually plan such an endeavor and enlisted the help of professionals that were very, very capable of constructing these bombs and very capable of invading a home and very capable of robbing a bank.
Agents needed to confirm the story.
He told us that these briefcase bombs were being stored in a storage facility in San Francisco, which Atsuki had rented under an assumed name.
The FBI and the San Francisco Police Bomb Squad found the storage locker. And inside, the briefcase described by the informant. Not knowing exactly how the device was triggered, they had to be cautious. The specialists placed the briefcase far from the storage building, then attached a small charge designed to open the case without detonating any bomb inside. It was a pipe bomb, an improvised device made volatile by gunpowder held under pressure. When sparked, the powder burns so intensely, it bursts the metal pipe walls, sending deadly shrapnel flying in all directions. To render it safe, they needed to open the pipe, releasing the pressure on the gunpowder. Using a water cannon is the safest way to do so, according to San Francisco FBI Special Agent Philip Senna.
The cannon slug is forced out by water under great pressure. That way you're not firing something that has heat and flame directed at the pipe. You're sending something that's relatively benign in the effort to uncap the explosive before it can explode. The device was very well constructed, quite sophisticated. It was designed to be placed and then detonated from a distance. I was told that the device was capable of killing somebody and having a relatively small blast radius, maybe 10, 15 feet, but being pretty devastating within that radius.
They later found and rendered safe a second bomb. The evidence was collected for processing at the forensics lab. Special Agent Fallon wanted to know if Atsuki's former San Francisco roommate, Leon Perry, knew about the bombs.
After the bombs were recovered, we re-interviewed Perry. Perry stated that he had no idea as to the existence of these bombs and certainly would have notified us if he did. We then sent the bombs and the materials to the lab, and we determined, the lab determined that, in fact, Perry's fingerprints were on the boxing materials that the bombs were in. Based on the fact that we truly didn't think that Perry was cooperating with us as completely as he could have and should have, we made the decision to revoke his parole and put him in jail.
Investigators had long suspected that Perry was actively involved with Atsuki. Now they had direct evidence. Unless he cooperated, Perry was facing a return to prison of up to 20 years. Special Agent Senna hoped to get him to talk.
We had enough evidence of his association with Atsuki and parole violation evidence that we had the ability to put a little pressure on him. He was comfortable in prison, so going back wasn't the worst possible thing that could have happened to him. We spent the first day probably 15 hours talking. And this went on for approximately a week, sometimes 10, 12, 14 hours. There were headache days.
Eventually, agents convinced Perry it was in his best interest to cooperate, and he began to talk.
That's where his car was. He needed me to go.
Perry said that on the day after the Boston shooting, he got a phone call in San Francisco.
He told us that Ted had called him, told him that things had gone bad in Boston.
Atsuki said he had shot 2 cops there and that he was shot too. He told Perry he was calling from the airport in Dayton, Ohio. Atsuki said he had to fly to Texas where he could quietly get medical attention for his gunshot wound. Atsuki had left his car and the gun he used in the shootout at the Dayton airport. He asked Perry to go to Ohio and get it. Perry agreed.
Atsuki sent the keys to the automobile and the long-term parking ticket, overnight mail. He was to go to Dayton, recover the car, take the murder weapon, and destroy it. Drive the car back to San Francisco, unload the rest of the stuff from the car, and hide it.
Perry found the car as Atsuki described. Inside was the 9mm Sig Sauer.
The murder weapon was a high-quality handgun. He was reluctant to destroy that high-quality handgun. So he decided that he would take the handgun and give it to his father.
He drove to his parents' house in Missouri and left the gun there.
We contacted the father. I spoke with him. I assured him that his son was doing the right thing. I asked him if he still had the handgun, and he said that he had.
Missouri agents retrieved the Sig Sauer. Ballistics testing confirmed it was the weapon that fired the fatal bullets.
Fingerprints were found to be on a bullet within the weapon that matched Azuki. So now we not only had the weapon that ballistics showed had killed the police officer, but we also had Azuki's fingerprints on one of the bullets in the weapon.
With physical evidence implicating Atsuki in the murder of Roy Sergey and in the building of deadly bombs, the FBI placed Ted Atsuki on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. But the dangerous fugitive had been on the run for 4 months. By now, he could be anywhere. In 1988, the FBI continued a nationwide manhunt for Ted Atsuki, a suspected cop killer. On January 22nd of that year, they placed him on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. To further the publicity of the case, the FBI asked a nationally televised crime show to profile Atsuki. During the broadcast, an acquaintance of Atsuki's called the show's toll-free number. When it seemed he had a legitimate tip, operators patched him through to FBI Special Agent Jay Fallon.
Jay Fallon.
The caller said that Atsuki was especially close with 2 particular relatives living in Texas, and that if anyone knew Atsuki's whereabouts, it was this couple.
Someone tells me that you saw it last month.
Authorities had previously spoken with the couple who claimed to have no contact with the fugitive.
If someone saw us at the birthday party, that's about it.
Checking the relatives' phone records, agents discovered a sudden increase in calls from Guadalajara, Mexico, where the family had other relatives. Atsuki might have fled there. The hunt extended into Mexico. FBI offices in foreign countries are called legal attachés. At the Mexico City legal attaché, FBI Special Agent Stephen Walker took on the case.
The FBI has no legal authority to conduct investigations on a foreign land according to the laws of that country. So we solicit, or the FBI would solicit cooperation, form a liaison relationship, and request officially that the host country law enforcement agencies do the work of the FBI. An investigation is very important.
Special Agent Walker met with the Mexican Federal Judicial Police to ask for their assistance in searching for Atsuki.
We didn't have an exact address in Guadalajara, but we did have some suspect telephone numbers in that area. And investigation conducted at that time failed to locate the relative or to locate Atsuki.
Special Agent Fallon hoped Atsuki's former roommate, Leon Perry, could help them. Offering Perry immunity on the bomb-making charges, the FBI convinced him to wear a wire.
We had devised a plan by which we thought that Perry could speak with family members of Ted Atsuki in an effort to have the family be forthcoming and advise Perry as to where Atsuki might be.
Agents created a fake passport for Perry and coached him on how to draw the relatives in.
Doesn't work nights, never works in Mexico.
Perry got this bogus identification and was going to leave town, so to speak. That was the story that he was going to tell Atsuki's family in an effort to have the family reach out to Atsuki to speak with Perry. There was also the situation as to the murder weapon, and one of the biggest selling points was that Perry needed to know from the family what Ted wanted done with the murder weapon before he fled.
Check your mic again. Wait.
After several requests, Atsuki's Texas relatives agreed to meet with Perry at a restaurant in Matamoros, Mexico. Outside, Boston Detective James Fong, FBI agents, and Mexican federal police waited, ready to listen in on the meeting.
All right. Mike, sounds good. We're ready to go.
Okay.
Other agents were inside.
Prior to the arrival of Perry, myself and another agent had gone into the restaurant and sat down in an effort to observe and surveil the situation. Perry walked in, sat at the bar.
He didn't have to wait long before Atsuki's relatives walked in.
We're going inside, right here. How's it going?
Agents could hear them talking, but Atsuki was never mentioned. After a few minutes, Atsuki's male relatives said they needed to leave. The surveillance teams changed plans fast.
They're leaving. They're leaving. They're on the move.
I was concerned because that was not exactly what we were expecting.
Right now, we're going to do a movement surveillance.
However, you have to have faith in the people that you have out there.
We'll pick it up here, and then you can pick it up in a few minutes. They're coming up to you.
They would have to stay close enough to maintain the audio signal, but still avoid detection. They hoped they were finally closing in on Ted Atsuki.
We'll pick it up here, and then you can pick it up in a few minutes.
In northern Mexico, Detective James Fong and other investigators had wired an informant and followed him as he met with relatives of suspected cop killer Ted Atsuki. Surveillance teams had to stay close to maintain the signal from the microphone they had on informant Leon Perry.
Hey, listen, I need to meet with Ted. I need to talk with Ted.
It's gonna be tough, I'm telling you.
Well, where is he?
He's not anywhere around here.
If he wants me to take care of the things he wants me to take care of, I'm gonna have to meet with him. And I can't tell. I don't know how else to tell you that.
Okay, tell you what.
Finally, the relatives said they would call Atsuki.
My wife has a number. I think what we can do is to head over to the bus station.
The bus station?
They've got phones there.
Oh, okay.
And they may be able to
help us
Well,
connect to him.
Okay, well, do you think he'll meet with me after we talk to him?
He's not going to meet with you. He might talk to you over the phone, but that's about it.
The bus station was in the town of Matamoros, a few miles from the Texas border. Investigators watched as the relatives placed a call on a public long-distance telephone. Undercover agents kept a closer eye on them. The relatives spoke briefly, then gave the phone to Perry.
What's up?
It was Atsuki.
Where are you?
He told Perry to destroy the 9mm Sig Sauer. He said he'd been robbing banks in Mexico, but he wouldn't say exactly where.
All right, we'll see you.
Still, the phone call was the best lead yet for Special Agent Philip Senna.
The Mexican federal authorities were able to get the phone number that was accessed from the clerks that run the bus station. The Federal Judicial Police were able to determine the location of that number in Guadalajara.
Working as a liaison with the Mexican Federal Police in Guadalajara was FBI Special Agent Stephen Walker.
We had the telephone number that was called. We knew it was Atsuki that was called. It was listed to a residence in Guadalajara, which turned out to be an apartment in the city. So it was just a matter then of going to Guadalajara, enlisting the services of the federal police to go to the apartment.
Teams of officers staked out the building, but there was no sign of Atsuki.
We were so close, but we didn't have him yet. So in some ways, it was more difficult than not knowing where he was, because now that we knew where he was, we wanted him desperately, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to accomplish that.
Then, 2 days after the stakeout began, Ted Atsuki appeared. The officers moved in. Atsuki drew a gun, but didn't get a shot off this time. The federal police arrested him, then transferred custody to the FBI the next day. Ted Atsuki was found guilty of the attempted murder of George Torres and the first-degree murder of Roy Sergey. He was sentenced to life plus 20 years. Officer Torres recovered from his wounds and returned to active duty. He retired from the Boston Police Department in 1997. Roy Sergey, promoted to detective after the shooting, left behind a wife and 3 children and scores of friends on the Boston police force. The community room at the D14 police station is dedicated to his memory. George Torres hopes the legacy of the case helps keep other officers alive.
We try not to take anything as a routine call. There's no such thing as a routine call. You go there, expect the unexpected.
After the shooting, Boston police began issuing bulletproof vests to all officers and replaced their 6-shot revolvers with 15-round semi-automatics. Now they stand a better chance at coming out alive when the unexpected happens. In the Midwest, the fugitive drug dealer will do anything to avoid capture. His desperate run is fueled by drugs and punctuated by gunfights. As he barrels across 2 states, local and federal authorities are determined to fight back and to stay in pursuit.
When law enforcement officers become targets, no one is safe. So when a crystal meth dealer on the run from the law began shooting cops, it took more than police to stop him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. With a fearless killer on the loose in the Midwest, residents had to help the FBI and state and local police bring down the dealer and deliver him to justice.
On February 2nd, 2000, on the quiet back roads of Lincoln County, Nebraska, Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight was on routine patrol when he saw a vehicle rapidly approach from behind. A maroon pickup truck sped past. McKnight spotted Texas plates on the pickup, but he could not make out the numbers. The deputy began cautious pursuit. 3 Recent weather conditions had created black ice on the roads. Without the benefit of streetlights, the roads appeared normal, but were treacherously covered with patches of slick ice.
Subject is now turning off on the side
Deputy
road.
McKnight radioed for assistance.
Please alert all available units.
Several Nebraska State Patrol troopers mobilized to try to intercept the pickup. Whoever was in the truck seemed to have no regard for his own safety. Since the roads were free of other traffic and no one else was in danger, McKnight decided high-speed pursuit was not worth the risk.
It appeared as though he knew the area that he was in, and due to the fact that he would take more chances and drive faster than I would, he was able to disappear.
Eventually, the truck vanished into the night.
I had called in for assistance from the department, and all the deputies and state troopers are working, and we combed the whole area and looking for that vehicle, and it was to no avail.
Nebraska police issued a be on the lookout bulletin for the maroon pickup with Texas plates. But that night, no one spotted the vehicle or its driver. A week later, and 40 miles away in North Platte, Nebraska, deputies responded to a call from a farmer. He hadn't used his barn in years, so the farmer was surprised to discover someone had been working there recently, leaving a strange workplace behind. The deputies found chemicals and other items available in farm supply stores. They had often seen this combination of materials in the area before. They were the ingredients needed to make methamphetamine, an illegal drug. A powerful stimulant, meth is also known as crank or speed. It's easy to make with materials commonly found on farms. In recent years, the Midwestern countryside has seen an epidemic of methamphetamine production, according to Lincoln County, Nebraska Sheriff's Corporal Casey Nelms.
Methamphetamine labs are a problem because it's such a rural area, a lot of abandoned farmhouses, farmsteads where people don't live anymore, gives opportunity for these people to go in and manufacture this drug pretty much undetected.
The drug is addictive and extremely dangerous. Users feel a temporary high, then intense paranoia and a craving for more. Most users become aggressive and desperate. When meth labs pop up in an area, violent crime follows. During their search of the meth lab in the North Platte barn, deputies found several pieces of mail. They were addressed to Charles Moses Jr. of Nocona, Texas. Deputies contacted Texas authorities asking for information on Moses. They received photos of Moses and learned there were warrants for his arrest for the theft of several firearms. Nebraska investigators also learned Moses drove a maroon pickup truck with Texas plates. The make and model of the truck matched the description of the one that had evaded Deputy McKnight only a week earlier. If Charles Moses was manufacturing methamphetamine, there was a good chance he was using it too. That might explain why Moses drove so recklessly on the night of the chase.
The people that use this become very paranoid. They have no pain threshold. Sometimes they're up for days, and they're just a real problem. They're hard to handle.
During their rounds in the tightly knit communities in the area, police showed the photo of Moses and asked if anyone had noticed an outsider fitting his description. Some residents reported seeing him in the past.
We were pretty sure that he was in the area.
But no one had seen him in several days, and Moses had no local address. At 11 p.m. on February 12, 2000, a week after the meth lab was discovered, Lincoln County Corporal Casey Nelms was about to start his shift. As was his routine, he picked up a cup of coffee before hitting the road. But that night would prove to be anything but routine. Through the window, Nelms spotted a vehicle that matched the description of Charles Moses's pickup truck.
Have a good night.
You too.
But he needed to get a look at the driver.
When he got out of the pickup, he resembled the individual that we were looking for.
The truck had Texas plates.
7216, 1089, Forest Park.
Nelms headed out to check the man's ID. But the man spoke first.
What are the roads like out there?
They're pretty slick. Where are you heading?
Just kind of heading out. Just going out.
I approached him and asked him if he was where he was going, what he was doing. I asked him for his identification, and when he handed it to me, the name on the driver's license was Charles Moses. You're under arrest. I really expected that once I got a hold of him in the vehicle that I was going to be able to, you know, take him out of the vehicle without any problem and place him under arrest, but he was just spectacularly strong. I just couldn't do anything with him, except just keep struggling with him to try to keep the weapon away from my face.
Moses fired.
Cars parking lot, shots fired. I was pretty sure 2 of my rounds hit. The second round I saw it hit the back of the cab, and the third round it also hit the back of the cab.
Nelms tried to follow Moses, but the fugitive drove with the recklessness of a man on methamphetamine and disappeared. Nebraska State Patrol officers heard the shots fired call and joined the search for the would-be cop killer. Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight, who had chased the maroon truck before, heard about the pursuit on the radio. He needed to position himself in a place where he was likely to intercept Moses.
There's an area that's commonly called the correction line. It's an area where I could see the best I thought possible 3 different roads intersecting that area. And that was the middle one. I could watch a mile behind me, that one, and a mile in front of me.
McKnight waited in the dark, hoping he was in the right place.
After about 10 or 15 minutes of sitting there, a vehicle did come from the west at the very road intersection that I was at. And as they got right to the front of my vehicle, I turned my headlights on and I saw the vehicle that was the same identical vehicle that I'd seen less than 2 weeks before. He was traveling in excess of 70 to 80 mile an hour, and being nighttime conditions, it was hard to see him, and he was out of distance me quite rapidly.
Deputy McKnight tried to maintain a visual of the pickup truck. But the vehicle seemed to disappear yet again. McKnight changed tactics.
At that point, he had pretty much, well, got ahead of me. At the same time, I had to slow down and check driveways and intersecting road intersections to make sure he hadn't turned off on me.
Then the deputy saw a vehicle's brake lights in the distance. It was idling at an empty intersection. Deputy McKnight called for backup. Moses had already fired at one officer. It was too dangerous for the deputy to advance alone. He waited for the backup officers. Before they came, Moses made his move. One bullet entered Stan McKnight's head. Another ripped through his hand.
Upon figuring out that I'd been hit by a bullet, I was going to try to call to the rest of the officers around to let them know what was going on. Only when I reached for the mic, I couldn't talk. My mouth was all full of blood and I was starting to choke. So I felt around and I found some napkins in the seat and I got them shoved up in my mouth to make the blood go out, and I got it spit out, and then I could talk and let them know that I'd been hit and that the subject had went on to the left and was going to be chasing him.
Despite his injuries, Deputy McKnight was not going to give up his pursuit.
The wind was coming through the holes in the windshield, blowing glass all over. My left eye was completely shut from blood. My right eye I was just blinking, but I could still see enough with my headlights to keep going down the road.
Based on the coordinates McKnight radioed, several teams of Nebraska State Patrol troopers headed towards stakeout positions in the area. They drove with their headlights and flashers off so they wouldn't alert Moses. Troopers in 2 cars positioned themselves on a dark county road and waited. Minutes later, headlights appeared. It was Moses. One of the troopers spotted a gun. After firing a full clip at Moses, the trooper realized a bullet had torn through his bulletproof vest. He was losing blood fast. The chest wound appeared to be life-threatening. They called for an ambulance from a hospital dozens of miles away. In the dark prairie, the troopers hoped their fallen friend would survive. In a frantic escape, Charles Moses had shot both a sheriff's deputy and a state trooper. Though gravely injured, Deputy McKnight continued pursuit of Moses, a man willing to kill to stay on the run. In February of 2000, Nebraska authorities confronted Charles Moses, a Texas fugitive suspected of running a methamphetamine lab. Escaping, he led police on a high-speed chase, shooting one deputy in the head and a state trooper in the chest before vanishing into the night. Paramedics stabilized the wounded trooper, then transported him to the nearest emergency room. Helping to process the crime scene was Nebraska State Patrol Sergeant Lynn Williams.
We secured the area, and then our major concern was obviously the gathering of evidence. So we collected the trooper's service pistol, his duty and gun belt, spent shell casings that were still at the scene. We took 35 millimeter photographs, videotaped the scene.
Moses had fired several bullets. One struck the cruiser's reflective seal, perhaps the only thing visible in the dark prairie.
The bullet had passed through the door of the trooper's patrol car, had struck the trooper in the abdomen, piercing his bulletproof vest, as well as traveling through his body.
To get through that much protection, the gun Moses used against police had to be a powerful one.
It was obvious that this was a high-powered rifle. We were looking for some sort of an assault rifle, something large bore, high-powered.
The state police brought the spent rifle slugs to their ballistics lab for analysis. Technicians there examined the size, weight, and metal composition of the slugs. They determined they were high-velocity rounds, most likely fired from a 7.62 SKS military assault rifle. Deadly weaponry designed for trained military personnel, something else entirely in the hands of a criminal. After the multiple cop shooting, the FBI joined the effort to capture Moses. Special Agent Ron Raywald took the call at the normally quiet North Platte, Nebraska FBI resident agency.
Our caseload primarily is in the area of white-collar crime, and it's not very common that we get called in to assist in investigations of violent criminal activity.
Agent Raywald gathered information to obtain an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant against Moses.
In this particular case, we anticipated that Moses would leave the state of Nebraska after he fled his arrest, and that the FBI could assist in locating him.
Hoping to catch Moses before he left Nebraska, authorities set up a command center at a state police barracks. Officers from virtually every law enforcement agency in the state shared intelligence on Moses. Several had had run-ins with him, usually in connection with clandestine meth labs.
He had a history of using abandoned farmsteads, farm places, not only for the manufacture of methamphetamine, but for hiding and living as well. So we knew that we needed to be aware of this and target those areas for a search.
Hundreds of police vehicles across the state mobilized, with officers looking for any sign of Charles Moses or his maroon pickup truck. In the sprawling rural landscape, finding Moses would not be easy.
Moses Jr. was last seen wearing a light-colored winter.
Investigators also hoped the public would assist in the search.
1995 4x4 pickup truck with
Media bulletins urged citizens to avoid Moses and to call the police if they spotted him.
information called a special tip line.
In the small town of Dickens, Nebraska, 30 miles south of where the two officers were shot, a young farmer found tire tracks leading to a garage. His parents' car was usually inside. Instead, there was a maroon pickup truck. His parents' car was gone. Recognizing the truck from media reports, the farmer called police. The Nebraska State Patrol confirmed that the truck belonged to Charles Moses, and that officers had hit the vehicle when returning fire.
The license plate that we were looking for was still displayed on the truck, which was registered to Mr. Moses. It had evidence that it had been shot at with a firearm. The bullet holes were in the back portion of the cab. They had shattered the back window of the cab. Some had lodged in the dash of the cab, and some had passed out through the front windshield.
Make sure you get this wheel.
Investigators also found evidence the suspect was wounded by at least one of the many shots fired at the vehicle.
We located human blood in the cab, the interior of the pickup. That led us to believe that possibly when the Lincoln County deputy had fired at Moses early on during the incident, that possibly he had been struck.
But if Moses was injured, he had the perfect drug to stay alert, pain-free and aggressive, to keep running without sleep.
There was a tremendous amount of paraphernalia located in his pickup that deals with cooking or the manufacture of methamphetamine. He virtually had a lab present in the back of the truck.
Investigators also found survivalist gear, police radios, and weapons in the truck. What they didn't find was the high-powered assault rifle Moses used to shoot two police officers. An hour after the pickup was found, and 60 miles northwest in Ogallala, Nebraska, the Nebraska State Patrol responded to a call from a man who said he was an acquaintance of Charles Moses.
He was in a car. I was wondering about you. Haven't seen you for a while.
The man said he had seen Moses 15 minutes earlier. Moses spoke to him at a truck stop. He was in a car that matched the description of the vehicle missing from the Dickens farm.
So listen.
While they talked, Moses heard a radio bulletin that said police were looking for the vehicle.
If you see this vehicle, call state
I gotta get out of here, man.
He panicked and took off. The man said he had waited 15 minutes to call police because he was afraid at first. The dangerous fugitive knew where his family lived. Police worried Moses would change vehicles again to throw them off his trail. Two hours after the last sighting, and 20 miles south of the truck stop in Paxton, Nebraska, a farmer noticed fresh tire tracks outside a house on his family's farmstead, a house that was closed up and unused. He called his family to ask if anyone had been to the house. They hadn't, but they told him about the bulletins, warning of a dangerous fugitive in the area. They said he should leave the place immediately. A relative on the line heard the farmer talking to someone. The police would soon learn that Charles Moses had just claimed his first murder victim. The deadly fugitive was still on the run, now more desperate than ever. On February 14th, 2000, 36 hours after fugitive Charles Moses seriously wounded 2 Nebraska law enforcement officers, a murder investigation began in Paxton, Nebraska. The victim was a local farmer, killed while talking to a relative on his cell phone. The investigative team had to piece together the murder from crime scene clues. The circumstances indicated Charles Moses was involved, to Nebraska State Police Sergeant Lynn Williams.
We had learned that the victim had drove in the abandoned farmstead to check on tire tracks that he observed. We believed that he surprised Moses, and Moses reacted with that surprise and shot the victim, killing him. Moses then drugged the victim from the victim's pickup, placed him on the ground, and Moses then got back in the victim's pickup and left the scene.
Troopers found tracks consistent with those on the model of truck the farmer drove, as well as broken glass from the truck on one side of the driveway. The position of the glass suggested the vehicle's driver's side window had been blown out. FBI Special Agent Ron Raywalt knew the glass was an important clue.
I anticipated that Moses would try and use a defense of self-defense, stating that he was returning fire from someone shooting at him. I knew that I could determine how many shots were fired and the direction that the shots originated from. When a high-speed projectile hits a piece of glass and the glass breaks, physical characteristics are left in the glass. This answers questions for the crime scene investigator. It tells them which bullet hit first and the direction of travel of the bullet.
The glass would be examined later in the lab. Behind a barn property, investigators found the stolen car that Moses was last seen driving. The car seemed hastily abandoned. In the back seat, troopers found chemicals, knives, and several firearms. It appeared that Moses had switched vehicles after he heard a radio report that police were looking for this car.
It was very obvious that Mr. Moses had been attempting to hide or camouflage, conceal the vehicle. He'd had a tarp over it, and Moses was in the process of covering the vehicle with broken and dead branches, tree branches, and that sort of stuff.
Investigators found the victim's identification, but they couldn't find the cell phone he was using when he was murdered. They believe Moses had the phone with him in the farmer's blue pickup truck. They issued an APB for the vehicle and contacted cell phone companies to begin tracking the cell phone signal. While powered on, cell phones are constantly in search of the nearest tower to be ready for use. Police can flag a specific phone number and learn which tower is serving it. 2 hours after the farmer's murder was discovered, a cell phone tower in Oshkosh, Nebraska, picked up the signal from the missing phone. But before police could respond to the location, the cell phone signal disappeared. The FBI also studied the glass fragments from the farmstead crime scene.
I was able to determine that one bullet had been fired from outside the truck into the truck, and that the bullet thereafter passed through the truck. My examination further disclosed that no shots were fired from inside the truck. This was not self-defense. This was murder.
Take a look at this.
With the farmer's murder and the theft of his pickup truck, the FBI issued another federal warrant against Charles Moses.
The facts of the case had changed significantly, and I was able to change the warrant application process to charge Mr. Moses with the federal carjacking statute with a homicide.
Lock their doors.
With Charles Moses crisscrossing the state, armed and out of control, Nebraska Governor Mike Johans held a news conference to warn the public.
This is a situation that we need to get through.
Police are seeking Charles Moses.
It was clear the fugitive was ready to kill civilians to get what he wanted.
He's considered armed and dangerous.
That evening, 80 miles to the west, near the Nebraska-Wyoming border, an elderly woman was enjoying a quiet evening. She heard someone breaking in through a door. She could hear an intruder walking through the house, then approaching her bedroom. It was too late to escape, so she did her best to hide. The evening news had said Moses killed the last resident he surprised. It sounded like he was looking for something, and then left. The woman was unharmed and called police from a neighbor's house. She explained that she never saw the man's face. But deputies from the Scottsbluff, Nebraska Sheriff's Department found tire tracks consistent with those on the pickup truck stolen from the murdered farmer. They also recovered automotive glass near the left tire track. Its position suggested it came from the driver's side window. The window investigators believe Moses shot out while killing the farmer. Local officers contacted the FBI about the new development.
From the facts of the case and the type of glass left at that crime scene, it was obvious that Moses had been involved in that burglary and that he was traveling in a westerly direction. Moses, and we got his physical description.
With Charles Moses believed to be near Nebraska's western border, the FBI notified Wyoming law agencies that a killer might be headed their way. The small town of Lusk, Wyoming, is 20 miles from the Nebraska border. the Lusk Police Department, Chief Gary Gill received the FBI bulletin.
That morning, we heard about Charles Moses from our dispatch. We knew that he was driving a Nebraska pickup truck, blue in color, and that he could be headed in any direction.
The Wyoming media warned the public about the fugitive. Around 1 p.m. that afternoon, the media alerts paid off.
We heard about the call from a truck driver who had called into dispatch and was relayed to our office that possibly that pickup truck Charles Moses was driving was at the south end parking lot of the truck stop here in Lusk.
Assistant Chief Dusty Chrisman responded to the scene along with Chief Gill. Several vehicles in the parking lot fit the description. Officers knew one of them might hold a murderer who also tried to kill 2 policemen.
We were looking at license plates. We spotted a blue pickup that had matched the description.
The plates matched. It was the truck.
We decided to try to block him in if we could.
The officers approached from opposite directions. Someone was inside, but the officers couldn't tell if it was Moses. The truck's driver's side window appeared to be missing. If it was Moses, he might have finally come down off a long and haggard methamphetamine binge. Chief Gill called for backup and waited for more units to arrive.
This would be the vehicle I think we're looking for.
Then, the driver woke up.
He's waking up, he's gonna take off.
But Assistant Chief Chrisman couldn't risk firing because from his perspective, he did not get a good enough look to be absolutely sure it was Moses. It meant another chase.
Our biggest fears during the chase is when Moses turned onto Main Street and headed north. We knew he was going to be traveling through our business district at more than likely a high rate of speed. And also the fear of maybe losing him once he got through the city limits and headed north on Highway 85.
Weeks after Charles Moses' violent spree began, law enforcement once again had him in their sights. After eluding Nebraska authorities and the FBI, suspected murderer Charles Moses had crossed into Lusk, Wyoming. Lusk police were in pursuit. But Moses had a lead on him and never hesitated for a moment.
Mr. Moses finally got away from us off Highway 85 onto our ranch road. The road was very rutted up. Our small vehicles with 2-wheel drive could not keep up with him in 4-wheel drive in the pickup he had. He went down to a ranch place and across a old dam and up into the pastures through fences and things where we couldn't chase him.
Authorities lost him again. So Lusk police teamed with the Niobrara County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Samuel Reed helped devise a 10-mile perimeter to contain Moses.
The perimeter was a very large area. We were fortunate in one way. It sat kind of in the middle of 3 major highways, and we had another county road that dissected it basically in the middle.
But they couldn't rush in.
We were unsure what his actions were going to be. So we stayed back a ways knowing that he had a high-powered rifle.
Every law enforcement officer in the area, including fish and game wardens, manned roadblocks to look for Moses and warned travelers to stay away from him. They also met with residents living in the 10-mile perimeter, asking them to stay vigilant and call police at the first sign of any suspicious activity.
I had a very deep concern that if we did not apprehend Moses before it got dark, that we would have a terrible, terrible time finding him. I knew the ranch people that were there. I was very, very concerned for their safety of him entering the house at gunpoint, taking him hostage and shooting them and taking a vehicle and leaving the area.
All right, thanks, sir.
Although Moses was somewhere within the 10-mile perimeter, the terrain made it too dangerous for deputies to go in on foot. Without body armor and tactical training, they would be vulnerable to ambush or a sniper attack.
For officers to go in there would have been extremely difficult. There are a lot of deep draws, pine trees, ravines that he could get down in. It would have been very, very, very difficult to go in there and find him.
Thanks.
Special Agent Ron Raywald helped Wyoming authorities with the FBI's federal resources.
The Wyoming office of the FBI brought in 2 aircraft to assist in the search on the state highways and the rural roads, trying to locate the vehicle Moses was in.
Flying a grid pattern over the area, one of the aircraft spotted the truck Moses was last seen driving. It looked like it was stuck in a ravine. A SWAT team from the Nebraska State Patrol was airlifted to the area. Moses was armed with a high-powered rifle. The SWAT team had to move cautiously, man by man. An aggressive fugitive on powerful drugs could be behind any tree, ready to kill. They positioned themselves above the pickup, but they had no visual of Charles Moses. He might be watching them, waiting for a clean shot. They had to start their search from the truck. To stun and distract anyone near it, they fired a flashbang percussion grenade. He wasn't there. They found footprints in the mud by the truck and began following them. But in the trees, the trail went cold.
He had eluded us, the people that were right on the scene. He had eluded a SWAT team that had been flown in out of Nebraska.
That night, Moses would surface again. At 8:30 p.m., rancher Jim Kramers and his son Justin heard their dog barking at something behind the house. They knew about Moses, so Justin went out armed. Someone was out there.
I've got a gun. Don't go any further.
From the brief look, they believed it was Moses. The gunman had to be stopped.
Justin, take your rifle, go around back, get on the back side of him, and then you do what you have to do. Okay?
Kramers was unarmed, in a standoff with a desperate fugitive who had never hesitated to use violence. The rancher had a plan and hoped it would work. In eastern Wyoming, a rancher and his son found fugitive Charles Moses on their property. From media reports, rancher Jim Kramer's knew Moses was wanted for shooting several police officers and killing a farmer for his truck.
Justin, you know, on the backside.
Justin Kramer's went to cover Moses from the back. The father risked his life, hoping to end the fugitive's rampage without more violence.
I was totally unarmed. Moses had a rifle and a large caliber pistol in his hands.
Hoping his son could protect him if his plan failed, Jim Kramer's offered Moses a deal. He knew the fugitive had been exposed to the day's cold rain showers.
And put it there by that wheel.
If Moses put down the guns and came inside, the rancher would give him a hot meal and throw his clothes in the dryer.
This was a plan in my head that if I got him in the house, I had nothing to fear from him because we would know that he had no weapons. It was too cold, and if he ran out of the house without any of his clothes with him, why, he was not going to be in good shape. I very seldom invite someone into my house that I don't ask them to eat, so I knew he was hungry, so I said, let's have something to eat.
Oh, that's the only way we're going.
If they got him inside, they would try to call the police without him knowing. By this time, Justin Kramer's had Moses in his sights. It looked like Moses was going for it. Then he tensed.
All right, I put my rifle down now. Where's the other guy you're with? Right behind you.
Jim Kramer's hoped Moses would not draw his son into his violence.
My greatest concern throughout the ordeal was that my son would not have to shoot someone. I didn't want him, you know, justly or unjustly, I did not want him to have to go through life knowing that he had killed a person.
If it did turn violent, Justin could not waver.
Justin!
One of the fears I had was if I did have to shoot at him that I might miss. I only had one shot while he had up to 6 in his pistol, where I had a single-shot rifle.
After weeks of a methamphetamine-induced rampage, Charles Moses finally slowed down.
All right, let's go on into the house. We'll get you food.
He left his weapons outside.
I never actually lowered my rifle. I brought it down a small ways, but within quick enough time enough that I could have brought it back up to put on him if I needed to.
Inside the warm house and out of his wet clothes, Moses concentrated on his first hot meal in days.
I was able to go out the front door of the house and was gone for around 5 minutes while I called the sheriff from my brother's house, and then I was able to come back in the same door while he never realized I was gone.
What's going on, Jim?
A Lusk police officer and a Wyoming game warden were there in minutes. Because of the Kramer's plan, the wild, deadly fugitive had nothing to fight with. After a staggering chase across hundreds of miles, filled with burglary, carjacking, gunfights, and murder, Charles Moses Jr. was finally in police custody. As they theorized, Moses had been wounded by Nebraska deputies.
Come on.
At a Cheyenne, Wyoming hospital, Moses was treated for a bullet wound to his shoulder, dehydration, and exhaustion. The drugs he had taken, and the police relentlessly on his trail, had run him into the ground. FBI Special Agent Ron Raywalt arranged for Moses to be transported back to Nebraska.
The morning after the arrest, when I drove to Cheyenne, Wyoming, I took a lieutenant with the Nebraska State Patrol with me, and I took Deputy Casey Nelms with me, the individual that had attempted to initiate the arrest originally. The purpose of taking these two individuals with me was so that when I returned to Nebraska with Moses, both individuals could effect the respective warrants that they were carrying. The lieutenant from the patrol arrested Moses for the violation of shooting a Nebraska State Patrol trooper, and Casey Nelms arrested Moses for the murder of the farmer as well as the assault by shooting of the two deputies from Lincoln County.
Moses initially fought the charges against him. But when confronted with ballistics and other forensic evidence, he plea bargained to avoid the death penalty. Charles Moses Jr. pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and 2 counts of assault on a police officer. He was sentenced to 190 years in prison. The state trooper Moses shot returned to light duty in June of 2000. Moses had also shot Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight in the head and hand. He spent nearly 2 months in the hospital. Never willing to give up, McKnight was determined to return to his regular patrol.
I had to go back for several different operations, with a total of 9 operations and 23 months of continuing therapy. After the doctors had stated that they had done all that they could for me, I was checked and we went through all the physical dexterity, and I was able to go back to work and maintain and do what I was doing before.
Methamphetamine has become the biggest drug problem in the Midwest. Law enforcement there are dedicated to fight it, whatever the cost.